Christoph Simpson, and I'll be doing this week's update covering August 28th to September 3. I'll be discussing current affairs and following up with some coverage of what's going on inside Lands as an organization. So, most of what I'll be covering with current affairs has to do with the government's current handling of the pandemic. I'll be talking about the government's relationship to capitalism and neoliberalism, as well as a bit about imperialism, because this has a lot to do with the government's handling of the pandemic currently, which is upsetting a lot of people. So, to get right into it, we've been on a few lockdowns and maybe we've had time to be more attentive to the news. And things aren't looking good right now despite the lockdowns. Some of the things that we called for from last year have not been done, like a national program to distribute food to communities that are left vulnerable. There are a lot of people, and the media has been featuring stories of some of them. There are lots of people who they get paid for daily work, so they get paid day by day, or some people who get paid cash in the week. Even a right wing former Prime Minister, Edward Siago, said that you can't really have a full week lockdown because you have people who they only buy food for 2 days. Now, the lockdowns that we're having now aren't for a full week, but it's still stressful for people who don't have the means to buy and store up food long term. And then when their working week returns, they have to take time off work to prepare to go back into lockdown. There are already people reporting that they don't have enough food and the government doesn't care to distribute food to these communities. They they use NIDS as an excuse in the past. They claim that because we don't have NIDS, they won't be able to accurately tell how many persons live in each household. And a person might say that their nieces and nephews live with them, and then the nieces and nephews actually live somewhere else just to get extra food. And I find that to be a really disgusting way to look at Jamaican people. I mean, so what if somebody does overreport and demand a little extra food? It's food, they're going to consume it. The government seems content with scoring a political point about NIDS, even at the cost of people going hungry. Furthermore, there hasn't been any sort of effort to say, okay, there's going to be a policy to cancel rent or reduce rent where landlords aren't allowed to charge rent. They haven't extended those orders to say, okay, so force the banks to suspend mortgages, as in mortgage payments. And they haven't forced the utilities, JPS especially, to stop cutting off light over people not being able to pay bills. Now, why this matters is that the same government puts these lockdowns in place when people can't actually go into work. So, work that has to be done in person, businesses that are closed because they're not essential. And then these businesses that aren't making revenue to pay these people, there are people losing income, but their expenses remain if they don't own the house. People still have to be finding rent from money that they're not getting. People still have to be eating at the same rates that they were eating before lockdown time. So the government hasn't really been looking out for people. Like, we get the importance of the lockdowns, but it there could be some sort of social cushion provided to offset the negative effects. And if the government wants to promote vaccination, it could relax some things, or it could force companies to give people extra days off for the year if they're using them to go and get vaccinated and recover from the side effects of vaccination, which can sometimes last 2 days. People who don't drive, how easy it is for them to get vaccinated on a lockdown. And then if they don't get vaccinated on a lockdown, if they get vaccinated during the week, during the little bit of what's left of the week, the vaccination sites close at like 4 p.m. That's within the workday. People have to take time off work to go and get that done. And then people who aren't like formally employed, people who have to hustle, or people who get paid in cash daily because they don't work in the formal economy but still get paid somehow, they straight up just lose income from not being able to do anything for the day. So this goes back to me talking about relief earlier. So there's just that in general. Like, the pandemic requires things of people The government's responses to the pandemic requires things of people that are very difficult for them to do without the government providing some sort of cushion. When we were hearing that we had the best performing stock market and all these nice, cute economic indicators, what did they mean for the masses of the people? Now that things aren't going so well, all those gains that were made in that time, what have they really accounted for? Has wealth actually been built from all the things that they were boasting about? Who has this wealth? Is the wealth in the hands of the people? No. Now, what does this have to do with capitalism? Well, under capitalism, the government is supposed to play a minimal role in the economy. It's supposed to just do what is necessary to facilitate the private sector and sometimes in emergency situations, do things to ensure the economy stays stable. The public service becomes undervalued, and you can see that in the way that the government treats our medical workers, both doctors and nurses. And don't be surprised if there's a max exodus of doctors and nurses very soon. We've already been facing that problem over the years because a lot of people they go through medical school, they have to take out student loans, even though the government subsidizes some tertiary education. And I mean, they're still paying millions of Jamaican dollars to go to medicine school. Nurses as well have difficulty putting themselves through school. Then at the end of it, you hear, oh, the government can't spend this much money on wages, so they either have to limit workers' salaries or they have to limit the number of workers that they hire. Because the IMF and the local neoliberals decide, okay, we need to stop spending so much on the public sector because to them, the public sector is just bureaucrats who do nothing, not actual nurses and doctors and teachers. So we have an underfunded healthcare system. We have a shortage of staff. A lot of people are getting paid better wages abroad, so they leave here. So the money that the government ends up spending to subsidize tertiary education and training for these people, that leaves. The skills that they try to build, those leave the country. And it's a government that is actively pushing doctors and nurses out of the country. And I mean, we are critical of imperialism, and the UK has failed to pay reparations. The UK actively poaches our doctors and nurses, but some people would stay to be loyal to country, and they would understand the government's position. But the government doesn't care about these people. It doesn't have that relationship with these people to get them to say, okay, I understand why the government can't pay well, and I will still work here as long as I'm satisfied with my wage and so on. No, the government outright doesn't care. There are frontline workers at risk, and the government just doesn't care about them. Doctors and nurses are outright accused of lying for exposing things that are happening in the sector. The incentive for doctors and nurses, the government is deciding to cut that. And the government doesn't see the importance of prioritizing healthcare workers in the pandemic if they get COVID 19. Everybody else's health depends on them being able to return to work. It's not selfish of them to be prioritized because we want our healthcare system to survive. Lastly, the oxygen situation. That was also chaotic. Multiple hospitals ran out of oxygen, and some were close to running out of oxygen. The government estimated that they would run out of oxygen. The government is blaming the private supplier of medical oxygen because they wanted to jack up the prices. Mind you, this is the same government that is promoting capitalism. How are you going to promote capitalism and whine about the effects of capitalism? Capitalists capitalize. That is what they do best. There is an opportunity to profit from our need for medical oxygen, and they're taking it. That is the model that you're promoting. How is the health minister going to be a part of a government that actively promotes capitalism and whine when capitalists are doing this? It is hypocritical. Like, don't whine to us. It's your government's fault. It's your party's fault. This is the foolishness that you promote, and this is what you deliver to the people. The government is murdering people, basically, because, I mean, they've put everything on this one private supplier, and then the private supplier is jacking up the prices, and they're like, oh, you know what? We're not so sure. What? This is the same government that wants to privatize our water in the future. Water, which is a critical resource, they want to privatize it. Expect similar things to happen. A private entity monopolizing our water, and being able to hold it ransom for however much money they want. That is what our government is promoting. And even if this company will be listed on the stock market and they tell you this foolishness about, oh, if you own some shares, you own a piece of Jamaica, that doesn't really count for much. It's still a company or operation doing everything. And if you don't have capital, you can't benefit from that. And if you do own some stocks, the money that you get in probably not going to be able to pay your water bill. But yes, we're facing raw capitalism right now. The government is allowing the private sector to hold medical oxygen ransom. It didn't make any other arrangements. It never pressed any other private sector entities to go and actually start supplying medical oxygen, like one potential competitor is thinking to do right now. Because the capitalists should do whatever they want, according to this government, and then they should, just facilitate it, whatever that means. So, on to the next thing. Why did I mention imperialism? What does imperialism have to do anything with the COVID response? Some months ago, I don't remember exactly when, the government said that the US would be operating some field hospitals here. And recently, Faye Ellington, a journalist, was asking what happened with that. Now, if you're happy for these field hospitals, you need to stop being naive. The field hospitals offered to us by the US were never to help us with the pandemic. Firstly, if you want to solve a problem, I mean, at least get help from somebody who can solve the problem. The US is not handling the pandemic well. That's the last country that we should want to go to for advice to handle the pandemic or for any form of material support for the pandemic. Sure, they have the vaccines, they're not really making use of them. They've discarded over 15 million, and we could have gotten the vaccines. But actually, doing any sort of operations like the field hospitals, we should have never trusted them to deliver on that. Secondly, the field hospitals are going to be deployed by Southcom. Now, Southcom is the US Southern Command. That is the branch of the US military responsible for US military overseas activities in Latin America and the Caribbean. It's our region's equivalent of AFRICOM, which is their combatant command for Africa. And they've been strengthening both Southcom and AFRICOM over the years. They want an increased military presence in the Caribbean. They've also taken advantage of the recent disaster in Haiti to establish Southcom presence in Haiti. And this is something that we should be opposing. This was never about our healthcare. This was about the US military getting a better foothold in the region. Now, if you actually want to welcome that foolishness here, you shouldn't be in this country. You shouldn't be welcome in this country. You're a traitor as far as I'm concerned. We're already seeing that it was never a genuine promise as it wasn't kept. So this isn't really something we should be begging for to happen. What we could do is say, okay, this shows that the government was lying, that we should have expected this, or this shows that we can't trust the persons who claimed that they were going to give us this. But it's not something we should have really wanted to welcome anyways. We can just take advantage of the moment to say, okay, we should have never really expected it. Anyways, that's it for current affairs. I'm going to move on to talking about what's happening inside lands right now. So, lands right now, we're preparing for our annual congress, which we have in November. And of course, this will have to be done online again because of the pandemic. Separate from the pandemic, we've tried to do things online in the past to accommodate the diaspora. We've had in person events before to celebrate the Congress, but to include the diaspora, we still have to do some elements of it online because we can't really afford to fly everyone here to participate in voting and the discussions and so on. So, becoming 5 years old is a big milestone, and what we're doing right now, we're in a process, as we are in every year, but this year even more significant, a process of evaluating what we've done and the effort that we put in and what makes sense to continue, what makes sense to discontinue, where do we want to see lands in the future, and so on. And some of you listening may still be wondering, okay, yes, land shares information, land shares some views, but what exactly is lands? To put it in the simplest way, lands is just an effort to organize the left in Jamaica. That's what it always was. We didn't feel like the PNP represented the left anymore, and we wanted to build something to represent the left. Not to be hostile with the PNP, because we've still worked with the PNP, but we needed an organized left in Jamaica and a voice for the left. But we needed to build that base and organize it. So that's what we're trying to do right now. And within our organization, there's some stuff that we're trying to iron out. So the organization, as it functions now, is a network of 7 different groups, and each group meets on its own. And we're just ironing some things out with the processes of internal communication and so on, to ensure information flows freely between the different groups, to ensure that the executive is serving the groups properly, to ensure that the political leadership is representing the groups properly, and so on. There are things like political education that we wanted to focus heavily on, but we haven't been able to, because the persons who would focus on political education, including myself, are more involved on the actual organizing front of it. So we're having frank discussions and internal criticisms of our processes and things, how things have been going so far. Every time these criticisms happen, it sort of realigns us and gets us to say, okay, we need to do better at this, and it renews parts of the organizations, and we try to develop in a certain direction. So even though this is all the way in November, we've advised the groups to start preparing from now. As I said, lands has 7 different groups, so persons meeting in their respective groups, somebody who wants to be a candidate in our internal elections would not necessarily be known well by everybody else. So we're trying to have more exchange between the different groups. So we want groups to ask questions of potential candidates. And if a candidate is running and a group has a specific question for that candidate, we want to give enough time for the group to ask the questions in their own meeting, submit the meeting report, and then that other group would have access to that report to be like, okay, um, you're running for this position, somebody from another group has a question for you. And then give them time to respond to the question and submit the report so the other group sees it again. To ensure that things work, there's a lot of things that go into organizing that aren't flashy or visible on the front. And because we've spent most of our effort trying to iron out these things, we haven't been as outward as we want to be. So, another thing that has come up that we do plan to address, which this weekly news release is a part of, is that we want to put ourselves out there more. So hopefully, when we find the right team of persons, we can be more effective in public communication and public relations. Hopefully, that will also allow us to grow larger so that our views hold more significance, and so that there's a broader base of people pressuring the leadership to act on certain things. So that's it for now. Thanks for joining. This is again Christoph representing Lance. I've covered current affairs and some of our own organizational affairs. Look out for another release next week.